Good. Thank you so much for today, doing an interview with me. How are you doing today, Richard?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much. It's incredible. Today I have a special guest. I've been wanting to get him on here because my passion is not only to interview many people and connect them together, but also I'm curious about languages, right? By nature. And you have accomplished incredible feat that I saw on. It's incredible. But before that, can you introduce to who you are to the audience, please?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Richard Simcott. I'm originally from the United Kingdom, and I have been studying languages pretty much all of my life. I've studied probably over 50 of them by now, and I use languages on a daily basis. I work as the languages director for a social media management agency called The Social Element, and I live in the Balkans in a city called Skopje, which is in the Republic of Macedonia, and yeah, so I use languages a lot for work, travel, family, and I'm very passionate about them. And I also run the Polyglot Conference, which takes place annually. And this year we're going to the beautiful city of Ljubljana in Slovenia, and it will take place at the end of October, from the 26th to the 28th of October. And you can find out more about it. It's for anyone who loves language. You don't need to be a polyglot to attend. It's just called that because it was born out of the polyglot community. And you can find out more on polyglotconference.com.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Now, this is very fascinating. For you, you learn a lot of languages, right? Where did it begin, though? Where's that seed of like curiosity about languages?
So when I was very young, I've always remember enjoying listening to different accents and languages. And so I used to play with different accents when I was a child. And then I was on holiday a lot, where I'd hear children from different countries, and I'd always want to understand what they were saying. And I was always really inquisitive about language. And then at school, I had French, and I also had other languages spoken around me, like Welsh and Thai and various other languages. And I just continued studying more and more, bought books all the time, and studied at home, studied at school and at university, and then lived in a number of different countries.
Oh yeah, one of my missions is to be able to impact the special education, because I think it's also the school. I don't know how you you experience school differently than I have, right? But we'll get on that topic later. Um, how can we learn as many? For example, I want to be fluent in Japanese, right? It's always been a I wanted because of anime, right? Because there's so many fascinating things about Japanese. If I can master or be fluent in Japanese, how can I begin to learn it? Because I have Japanese book and I try to exposure myself, but I couldn't learn the phrases. What can I do to develop that?
Yeah, it's slowly but surely. So there's no fast way of doing it. There's no pill that you can take to learn languages, really quickly. It just doesn't work like that. So what I suggest is that you take a book and you work through it methodically. And this is what I do. So I'll take a course book and I'll go through it step by step, and then I'll try and practice it as much as possible, whether that's writing things out, listening to the audio that goes with it, um, speaking to people, finding people online, language partners or language teachers, and using the language actively. If you're into anime, then I guess with Japanese, you're going to have a lot of time to sort of hear and practice. And I'd suggest learning the words that you hear most often. So one of the mistakes people make with language learning is that they try and learn, say, professions, and they'll learn all the professions. But of course, they don't need all of those words, and then they feel disappointed that they can't remember them all. But if the only professions that you need to know are the ones that are sort of related to your family and friends, then if none of your family and friends are vets, or none of them are civil engineers, then why learn that word in the beginning? You can learn it later. You can pick up more vocabulary as you go. So focus on what you know and what is relevant to you in the beginning. And then as you practice different scenarios where you're using the words that are most important to your life, you will start picking up new words as well. And those vocabulary areas will grow. So I think that's probably the best tip I can give, is that you just concentrate on what you need in the beginning, so that it's more manageable, and set yourself goals, clear goals that you can look back on and say, okay, I said that next month I'm going to learn this, 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 and this. Where am I now? Where am I after a week? Where am I after 2 weeks? Where am I after 3 weeks? Where am I after the month? You know, go back and look back and make sure that they're very definable, very easy to check off goals that you can set yourself.
That's so powerful and insightful. Thank you so much for that. As a polyglot, right? How can we, if we can, what if I want to learn Korean or Japanese? Can we learn all at once or at a time?
So there's nothing stopping you learning more than one language at once. The only thing I'd say is you're limited by your time, and each person knows how much time they have. So I'd say it's best to just monitor carefully. You know, are you happy with the progress you're making in the 2 languages, or would you prefer to make faster progress in one language? And therefore, you know, if you are limited to how much time you can study. The other issue can be sometimes that languages can overlap and you can feel that they interfere with each other. So I'd say in that kind of case too, there's nothing wrong with stopping one of them and continuing with the other, and then picking the second one up again a bit later when the first one is maybe a bit further down the road, so a bit stronger. And certainly I've met people who have done that and then managed to get the second one after a while. I've met other people who have learned 2 or 3 at a time, and it's been no problem at all. I think it's a very individual thing. It's a very personal thing, and I think it depends on your levels of frustration and your threshold and tolerance for sort of being patient in your learning. And if you're an impatient person, if you feel that it frustrates you to wait for the progress, then naturally 2 or more languages is going to be a longer road than doing one. Just because you're thinking of more things and you've got to dedicate more time to the additional languages. So it's an individual thing.
What makes you what makes you want to learn all?
I just feel like them, and when I meet people who speak languages, I just enjoy being able to speak to them and say things in the languages. The reaction you get is very positive. I mean, at the moment, I'm in South Africa, and I learned a couple of words of one of the local languages, and people react very positively just to a couple of words even, and it makes you then want to learn more. So I was never going to learn really, because I'm not here long enough, and for me, I need to learn. If I learn a language properly, I need to see a reason for it, and I need to understand that I'm going to be able to use it. And a language from, say, an African language, I mean, this is my first time in Africa. I've never been here before, and you know, I'm very unlikely in the Balkans to hear an African language again. So I'd have to make a very big effort to hear one, and I have limited time available during the day. So I kind of said to myself that I wouldn't learn one. I'd just learn some Afrikaans, because Afrikaans is similar to other languages I speak, and therefore easy. But when I arrived here, the people are just so nice, and I learned a couple of words, and just saying things like thank you and hello, they're just like so shocked, but in a really positive way. And And instead of just sticking to my first plan, instead I bought a book. I don't know how much I'll do, but I want to learn a little bit more. Now that I've said a few words, I want to say a few more. So it kind of doesn't stop, and I think that's where it started, and that's how it always ends up being for me, that I say a few words and then I get a good response, and then I want to do more. So it's everybody else's fault because they're being too nice to me, and then they encourage you to do more and to learn more. And I think yeah, I mean, I like that they do that. So yeah, that's kind of the motivation. I think it's the people that motivate me.
That's so cool. But I was thinking that you have studied so many languages. You also seen a similarity to all the languages, right?
Yeah.
Like people, like culture and languages. Because since I'm Vietnamese, right, I can see the similarity to a lot of Asian culture, but to also the world. Because I'm fascinated by it. That's why I interview many martial artists, language expert like yourself, and other artists and experts to connect the dots. Because we are like came from one connected. Can you talk about what you see that the connection with that?
With the languages?
Yeah.
I mean, languages are usually in families of languages, so there's normally more than one language that sort of related together. They're related to each other. So I mean, if you learn a language like French, and then you learn Spanish and Italian and Portuguese and Catalan and Romanian, you see a common thread, whether it's the grammar or the vocabulary. You see these common threads that help you to learn each language more quickly, I guess, than the first, because you've done one, and therefore you get a lot of free vocabulary, you get a lot of free ideas of the grammar and how it should work, and the structures tend to be quite similar. That said, it can confuse, because you can get words that are false friends. They mean one thing in one language and something completely different in another, and they're basically the same word. And then you've got, I think, with also languages that border each other. So geographically, you have a country like Hungary, where it borders Slavic speaking countries, and obviously Austria with German speaking. And you see in these languages that are not related, words and phrases that they've adopted from the neighboring languages, and probably because of of business and doing business with each other, crossing goods, selling goods across the border. They've learnt bits of each other's language, and they've just become part of each other's languages. We get this in Macedonian. We have a lot of Turkish words. So there are over 6,000 Turkish words in Macedonian. And these are all because of history, the historical links to different countries. And, the Balkans were under Turkish rule for a long, long time. So a lot of Turkish words entered into the languages. Some of those languages retained the Turkish words. Some of them lost them on purpose. So a language like Bulgarian, they tried to cleanse the language of the Turkish words. And then the interesting thing with these sort of words and sort of they even influence the grammar as well sometimes. So you get some really interesting things that happen in some of these languages because of the history and because of who their neighbors were and who they did business with. And yeah, it's quite strange. But it's fun as well, and I think this is kind of what you wanted to tease out of me, I guess, as an idea. It's that, I suppose, is what I see. I see the connections a lot more between cultures and languages.
Yes, thank you so much for that. That's what I've been trying to connect, because for you and for us, I want to be able to, because there's a lot of negative news, and I want to create like an interview for positive good in the world, because in life I have dealt with pain, and that's why I want to do these things to bring people together to see as a whole. That people are good, like you say. That people are like in countries, they're very nice people, right? And then you want to make them learn more and more. I mean, they want you to make. I mean, that's it. You therefore learn more because of them.
Yeah, yeah.
And, but also because I find it fascinating for me also because as I dive deep to because I was born in America, and but my mom is she was born in Vietnam, right? I remember there was one kid in middle school, and he's like, "Why are you saying Vietnam wrong?" Or you know how like people pronounce my last name. My last name is Ngyen. They said Nguyen, but it's Win. So, like you said, like they borrow from each other. I read that because the Chinese are really, you probably know more than I do, but they have connection, what connected with the Vietnamese. We used to have the Chinese character, but the Vietnamese take it out, right? And then now we use Roman, right? And the same thing happened with Korean. They use Nahongo. It's very fascinating, but the Japanese still have the kanji. Can you explain a little bit about that? Because I want to know that one.
Okay. I mean, I'm not probably the best person to ask about the historical roots of this. I wouldn't profess to be an expert in it, but I do know that the Japanese have got the kanji, which some of them are based on older, and they've been brought into the Japanese language throughout history at different stages. So some of the kanji are still the same as in modern Chinese, and others have been changed in Chinese, so they're no longer the same characters. They could be different. So there are some sort of false friends as well in that way. And I know that kanji can be used in Japanese to represent various things. So it could have different types of pronunciation depending on what that kanji represents in the sentence and what the context is. So this is why when people say, reading and writing Japanese can actually be harder than Chinese, because you don't know always, unless you know the context, how you pronounce the kanji. And what they do is they mix the kanji in with their own hiragana and katakana. So they'll have their own sort of Japanese alphabets, which what they'll do, especially for verbs, they'll have, you'll probably hear the imasu, for the present tense in Japanese. And what they do is they'll combine it with a Chinese character or a kanji, and then they add the Japanese ending for the verb as well. So imas is present tense, imashita is the past tense. So they'll say, you'll see words mimas or mimashita, and then you'll have the mi bit, which is in the Chinese character, and then the mas or mashita would be in the hiragana. And then obviously they have romanji as well, which is the Romanized version, like pinyin in Chinese, for Roman letters for transliteration, which some people cite as an extra alphabet. I don't know. I don't know how contested that is. It's not being my sphere of expertise, but I know also that the same thing like you said with Korean. There were these Chinese characters that we used, and they've been kind of taken out of the language slowly but surely. But you still see, I mean, people I know who speak these languages or focus on these languages, they always tell me that they see these kind of bridges because I guess of trade and history. So when they learn a new Southeast Asian language, they can often trace back the Chinese, where the Chinese words have influenced the language, because there'll be a slight change of pronunciation maybe, but there'll kind of be a regularity to that as well in many cases. But it's certainly interesting.
Yes, thank you so much for that. And also, I would like to ask you, like, what makes you want to travel? Was it always your nature to travel, or?
I travel if I feel like traveling. So I think that if you want to travel and you like traveling, then do it. If you don't and you're naturally not interested, or you don't think it's for you, then I don't think everyone has to travel or needs to travel or should travel because people say that they think they should. I do come across people who travel that think it's the best thing in the world, and that's great if it is for them. But that doesn't mean that we all have to do the same things. And I've met other people who, they will travel and they'll say things like, you'll see them post on different social media. If you only stay in your own country, you read a page of one book, and if you travel the world, you basically read a library or something. And I don't know if I agree with that, because I've met people who don't travel and who are actually very well educated and very well aware of the world around them, and they know a lot of stuff that even through traveling I probably would never know. And so I can't ever say that I would say everyone should do it, but I personally enjoy it. And I mean, not everywhere and not everything. I don't need to see every single place. I don't need to go to every single country just because they're there. But it's nice to see new places. Sometimes it's nice to see new places in countries I've been to before. So yeah, I mean, I go where I want to go. If you know what I mean. I don't do it because I think I should or have to. Yeah, I'm kind of a just because if somebody says something that's exciting and nice, I'll listen to it, and if it sounds exciting and nice to me too, then I might do it. But if it doesn't, just because they liked it, it doesn't mean I'm going to do it.
Thank you so much for that, Richard. That's pretty amazing. Like when I hear that, yeah, I do want to talk about education. The whole aspect of education. What do you think about it, like across the world? Because I feel like there's in America, the American system of education is actually broken because it doesn't teach the skill set or the social skill set that they need to learn. Because I was put in the special education, like you said, I read lots of books, right? It begins reason was to find out the truth, right? To be able to, because I have a massive breakdown during 2011. I was going through a dark time when my ex broke up with me. So during when I was in elementary school, I didn't remember that they taught about the brain. They only teach you about the math and the stuff like that. And you know how like in the school they uh, give you vocabulary for English. I actually hate English, but they never actually help you to understand to effectively learn vocabulary because language also has to do with lots of vocabulary. Can you help bridge what do you think about education?
It's a very broad subject, so I don't know if I can summarize it all completely. But my thought is that sometimes what we do is we teach things because we think we need to teach them, and they're not necessarily, as you say, practical. And I think that sometimes we are missing practicalities. So things that people really realistically need in their day-to-day lives when they finish school. I think that school as a whole for a society, it's good because it's good to have a system where there's a common understanding of things. So there's a common set of things that people learn, and then in that society, generally they're aware of them. Whether that's the best way of teaching them in different subjects, I don't know. I see countries like Finland where they have a very successful education system, and I believe, are project-based programs that they have, and that means that they use all of their skills to complete a project. So it's not necessarily that they do English, maths, Finnish, or whatever they do. They just use everything together to complete something. And that sounds a bit more logical to me. you know, having not experienced it, I can only say from an ideas point of view of what I've heard, it sounds logical because life is like projects. You know, if you have to do something, you use a lot of different skills all together. It's never just, it's very rarely just maths or just language or just one thing. It's often a number of things together. So that does make sense to me. In terms of language, I mean, language education is something that I can speak on because I see it happening in the UK, and I know that, you know, people in the United Kingdom, for example, and often in the US, I guess too, but English-speaking countries, people will take a language all the way through high school and come out and they can't speak it, and that's a real shame because it's almost made like an impossible thing. And I think because the focus is very much on learn this vocabulary, learn this bit of grammar, do this test, this assessment, and then you've passed that and then you move on to the next thing. And that's not what language is about. So like you say, learning vocabulary is good. We should do it. And even for our mother tongues or for the first language of the country we're in, we need to learn vocabulary too, but we need to learn it in a sensible way that makes sense to us. Because otherwise you're just learning blah, 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 blah for a short period of time and then you forget it. So I think things need meaning, and that's one of the things we see, not just in language, we see in other subjects too. People come out of school and they say, they don't remember anything about the history, they don't remember anything about science, they don't remember anything about maths, apart from maybe multiplication and you know, the basic stuff that they actually use or they see or hear people using when they come out of school. That kind of stuff they remember, but do they remember algebra? Probably not. Do they remember anything else? Probably not. The names of different right angles, for example. Well, I mean, you know, I see my daughter learning about different right angle triangles, and honestly, does she really need them in life? Maybe. I suppose what happens at school is, you know, they teach for all eventualities, and some people will use some subjects more than others, and other students will use other subjects more than others. The thing is, it's difficult to know what kids are going to do, and I suppose there needs to be a bit of a broader brush. But whether it's the best way of doing it, I don't know. I certainly think we need to prepare people more for the outside world. I think that education and certainly university can be a bit etherical. Like it gives people a false idea of what the world is like when you leave. And that's not to say it's bad, but it could be more practical. And I think, you know, you described, you know, that you yourself suffered, I mean, for a different reason, but I've met many people who suffer with depression after they finish school or university because they don't know what to do, and they don't know how to apply what they've done, or they think they're going to go straight into a management position because people at school have said that to them, or their parents have said that to them because they've done well at school or at university. And yeah, unfortunately, we need to start learning then how to actually work. So actually the entry positions are the ones we should be looking at, and that seems almost like a downgrade because you've been doing all of this theory for so long that theoretically you're up there, but practically you still have a lot of very basic stuff to join together.
Yes. Well, back when I was in high school, I got kicked out of high school for skipping a lot of school days because I was questioning a lot of things. How can I believe that education should be able to effectively change you, your mindset, the way that you perceive things, be able to change something, right? I think that's truly effective education. And the reason why I'm passionate because a lot of, you know, adults around me say school is the way, school is successful. If you don't go to school, you're a loser. So what the reason why is I was in college once before and I was actually totally lost. And I see it a lot with my friends. They're actually lost. Like even though they were told that they're a lot of people. Okay, so I have a YouTube channel, this YouTube channel, and there was this guy comment, and he's 45, and he do whatever. He was told that he was guaranteed a success or a guarantee to life, to offer to life. He does these things, but it obviously didn't happen. And I hear so many of my friends are like that, and so that's why I'm so passionate about this subject is because too many oftentimes adults tell you these things, but they only hear of outside. They don't they don't see what's going on behind the scenes. They don't ask questions, right? And oftentimes it get lost in translation, you know.
I think that the education system generally is it's structure, 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 and then you finish, and then it's kind of, oh, where do I go? And people do tell you things, and the thing is that often they don't qualify them. They say it as though it's the truth, and they know it, and there are no promises. There are no promises, and so it can be a struggle after you finish. I think there is a good sense of discipline in finishing a degree. It's fun. It can be good to do in that way. It's not the easiest thing to do, and in the US, it's definitely not the cheapest thing to do. So I think that there needs to be a balance. How do I do this? What do I do this? I don't know what the options are in the US. I know that there are other types of community colleges and things where you can do things later, and I think that that's one of the things as a child you don't appreciate actually, that you are very young, and you don't know that you feel old, and you feel that like 2 years older than you is going to be really old. And it's only when you're older you realize, actually, I was very young, and I could have just waited an extra year, or I could have taken a year to think, or to have a year traveling, or a year doing something else, or a year working, or whatever. But it almost seems like, oh no, if I don't do it now, I'll never do it. And of course, we know as we get older that there are ways back into education. There are ways back into getting the diploma or the degree that you want to do, and that genuinely is interesting to you. Or it could be that you go down a route where you don't need a degree or a diploma. You simply you work through something in a more practical way, and you get certificates of achievement and continue that way. I mean, it depends on so many things that it would be impossible for me to comment fully.
Yes, thank you so much for that. Because I was thinking about how, as you say about tests and stuff like that. Because we were, because I often say in my videos that we often measure intelligence by grades, right? If you're an A student, that means you're smart, or if you're a D student, you're stupid, right? I mean, I often feel like that. But usually, people who are, let's say, if they're very interested in the subject, they would get A's, right? But if they're really bored or hate that subject, they will get a D. Because I remember back in high school, I was learning history or NFL, or it was government. I really hate the subject, so I got a D. But if I was a little bit good at math, so I would get an A or B. It's how people are interested in. It's very interesting. Sorry.
Yeah, of course it is. Yeah. And it depends as well on what's interesting at that time in your life. So that's just a measurement of where you were at that point in your life, and a few years later it could be even different again.
Yes.
It depends on how inspired you are. It depends on so many things.
Yes. What inspired you to teach languages? That's what I'm interested in.
So I don't teach languages necessarily. I only teach them to my daughter, and that's so just because I can give her something for free that's easy to do. All I have to do is speak, and that's it. So I don't really teach them otherwise. I just work with them. And but my inspiration to teach my daughter was that I could give her languages for free, and it was very easy to do. It just required me to play with her and interact with her in different languages. So that was kind of my inspiration to do that. And I use languages that particularly mean a lot to me because of I spoke them as a child, or something happened that I lived in a country that it meant a lot. So the languages I use are French, Spanish, and German with her, as well as English, of course. And I also feel that those languages are a big help to to understand English better, first and foremost, but also to use for study or travel or work later in life.
Oftentimes I always get from my friends, and they always say like when you learn a language and you can like be able to become a translator and they pay lots of money. Is that true, or I don't know? Because I'm just
there are definitely translators and interpreters who earn more money than others. People used to say to me when I was at university, "Oh, it's really good you're doing all of these languages. You can just go to Brussels." And Brussels is obviously synonymous for us with the European Union. So people thought that I'd just go there. And I said, well, when I asked them, well, what precisely do you expect me to do in Brussels? They didn't ever have an answer. It was just something people repeated like a parrot. And I found that there was nothing really behind it. But of course you can get jobs and you can get paid reasonably well. I don't think you're ever going to be a millionaire from working as an interpreter or translator, but you can certainly earn a decent amount of money and have a nice enough life, put bread on the table. And it also often, especially as a translator, because you're doing the writing part of it, you can often be based in a number of different places, so it allows you flexibility.
Thank you so much for that. What is your passion in life and what you love to do?
Passion's got to be languages. So I don't think I can really. Yeah, that's my main passion, and I do love learning them, and I love traveling and using them. So it's always a lot of fun for me to do that. Yeah, I think that's probably all I could say.
That's okay. That's okay. Well, I was actually thinking also because I want to be able to see, because I want for your learning language. How do you learn? Do you take your time to write them down, or how do you memorize them? How does it work for you?
So a little bit at a time every day. So I try and do a little bit every day. And sometimes I write things down. Depends on the language. If it's a very different language, then I'll write things quite a lot. If it's a similar language to one I already speak, then it'll often be more reading and listening that I will do, and then trying to speak it as often as I can. Just because I don't really need to study the language sometimes so much, because maybe I already understand it, or that was certainly the case with Afrikaans. I could already understand it fairly well, so I didn't really need to study it as such. So I just listened, spoke, and read, and that kind of worked to get to a basic level. And I'm not going to say I'm fantastic at every language. Of course, I'm not. But this is a nice way of getting kind of a conversational level in a language quite quickly, because the link to languages I already speak a lot better. And then if it's a completely new language, yeah, I'll read and write and speak and do as much as I can, really.
Thank you so much for that. Also, for if I want, do you also often sometimes plateau? Because sometimes I plateau on languages because it's like off and on. You get plateau for languages.
So yeah, languages do plateau. Sometimes it's because I particularly want them to plateau. As far as I'm concerned, I don't need to speak every language to a very high level. There's absolutely no need for me to speak every language to the highest level possible, because I probably don't need them all to that level. So some languages I learn just with the goal in mind to be able to go to the country and communicate with people and to talk about myself and have very basic conversations. And that's fine. Other languages I need at a higher level because I use them more often. But that's when I have to you have to make an effort, because you can get to a level where you can speak and you can explain things, but then you don't move much further forward because you can already say what you want to say. Then you need to make an effort to read different things and to listen to different ideas and different topics, and that's where you start listening to different topics and reading around different topics in the language, so that you see and hear different types of language used, and then you find that the plateau, slowly but surely, you start moving up again in your ability.
Thank you so much for that. I saw one of your videos. You have books.
Yeah.
You read. I'm fascinated by your reading. So many people don't read because, after I read a book, it's called The Slight Edge. It says that the moment that people leave high school, they stop learning reading. The moment that people go to college and they stop reading, and they said the average CEO read about 50 books per year, right? That's equivalent to a PhD.
Right.
Can you explain what books do you read? Do you read self-help, personal, or just language books?
No, I've got to be honest. I just language books, really. I will read some other books every now and again, but generally just language books. I actually really love going back to them and reading them and learning more about language. That's my main focus, and I think I'm not one of those people that will read like a gazillion other books. It really is very much concentrated on language, and I don't know what I think of this, but it's true that a lot of people leave school and then that's it. It's kind of like my learning's done. I can't imagine that myself. But do you know what? Sometimes I see people who do that and they lead very happy and fulfilled lives, and so I don't think there's a right or a wrong. I don't think that, just because somebody doesn't read, or just because someone doesn't travel, or just because someone doesn't, all of these things that we always say, I don't know, people can look at as kind of a, wow, isn't that fantastic? Maybe I should do that, but they don't really want to. I say go with what you really want to do. And if you don't want to do that, and what you want to do is you want to go to a Pilates class and you want to learn about yoga and you want to, I don't know, you want to jog on the beach with your dog, do that. Whatever makes you happy, do that. As long as you're not hurting anyone, we don't have to do the same things. And I think I see these adverts all the time. The average CEO reads 50 books a year, and I've seen these adverts as well, like you alluded to, and I'm like, okay, that's fine for the average CEO, but does everybody want to be the average CEO reading 50 books a year? I don't know. Has everybody got the time for it, or do we need to earn money to pay for the things that we actually do want to do? Like maybe some people like bowling, they like watching sports, they like, barbecues. I don't, people like different things. So I very much, I'm kind of not for making everyone do the same things. I think that we have a nice diversity in life, and I think that's the way it should be. And because we're all motivated and interested in different things.
Thank you so much for that. I guess that's because, people around you trying to project their reality, what you should do most of the time. Well, that's how I feel, because people always try to project what I should do and who I should be, or society in U.S. But for me, the reason why I say these things, of course, it's in the books too, but it's because I didn't care much about education. Actually, I hate school. I hate homework. I hate a lot of things that they'll throw at us. We can't be who we wanted to be. Like, we can't, be ourselves. It's sad. Oftentimes I want to be able to express myself, but you can't. People say things. So, thank you so much for that. But back on the language, like, how do you, when you have a language book, how do you concentrate? Like, because I oftentimes, like, with focus, on like a Japanese language, but then I lose focus. So how can you go back? Like, how do you use language for?
So set yourself a goal that's realistic for you. If you know that you can't focus to do a whole lesson, do half a lesson, do a quarter of a lesson. What's realistic for you? Is realistic for you 10 minutes in the morning and 10 minutes in the evening? Is that too much, or is that okay?
No, that's good.
Yeah,
Usually I have like this weird goal, try to do like an hour.
yeah.
But
But if that's not working for you, then I think that there's no point in trying to make yourself do something that you don't want to do, because ultimately you're not going to do it. You may do it for 1, 2, 3, or 4 sessions. I don't know. But ultimately, if you are really resenting it, the only thing you're going to do is build up negative emotion about studying and about learning the language. So you're going to be like, oh no, I've got to do the Japanese again. Oh, I've got to pick up that book. I've got to read through it. So why put yourself through that when you don't need to? What you can do is just say, okay, ideally, yeah, I mean, I like the idea of doing an hour, but actually an hour is quite a long time to sit on your own to study Japanese. But do it, saying to yourself, okay, I'm going to do the first dialogue of the book and the vocabulary, and I'm going to take 15 minutes in the morning to do it. And then in the evening, what I'm going to do is I'll check that and see, okay, is it still with me? Is it in my head? Am I happy with that? Should I move on, or do I need to revise it for the last 15 minutes? Sometimes you need to revise it and you need to go over it again. Maybe the grammar's not clear. Maybe the vocabulary still isn't clear. When you read through it again in Japanese, there are still things you don't understand, or you don't understand it at all. So there's no shame in revising. There's no shame in going over the same material. If that's what you need to do, then that's what you need to do. You're still doing something constructive. And if you do it that way and you break up the time, then I think it makes it more realistic as a target.
yeah, thank you so much for that. And also, I was thinking about if people want to learn languages and they have a fear of learning language, how can they overcome it? Did you ever have a fear of learning languages?
Not a fear, but I do meet and I have met people who feel embarrassed speaking another language because they feel that the accent is a bit funny, and they say they feel that the best way of doing that is to speak it with their normal accent, and so they don't feel like putting on a different voice. And I say is you've got to get into your role. So you've got to pretend almost that you're with a language. You can't, part of the language is the accent. Part of that is you have to make a change to the way you speak so that it sounds more authentic. Because maybe the pronunciation doesn't fit, say, English or something else. So to properly pronounce it, you need to make changes that sound a bit weird in the beginning and unnatural. But it's strange how that becomes more natural after a while. And it takes practice and it takes time to do it. And that's what I find most people are scared of when it comes to language. I've not really met anybody who is scared of anything else. I've met people who lack motivation. And I think that's more to do with the fact that they think they should do this and they should do that and they should study this many hours, like you said now. And that's because they put this pressure on themselves, whether it's because internally they believe that that's what they should do, or because externally they believe or perceive that's what other people do, or other people tell them that's what they should do. And of course, the only person who really knows what you want to do as an individual is you. No one else can tell you what's comfortable for you, because they're not inside your head and they're not inside your body. And so I'm a great believer in knowing yourself and knowing what works for you, and listening to your body and listening to your mind, and doing it that way. Because if your goal is to build up hours of how much you study or how much you do a certain thing, build it up. Treat it like a training regimen that you have. You know, you don't go to the gym and all of a sudden you start lifting the heaviest weights. It's not how it works. And I think people generally accept that when you start working out or you do other things, that you start slowly. I mean, any instructor for any physical activity who's worth anything they would never advise you to go and run 10K straight away, or it's just not what happens. They start you slowly and they say, okay, you do this many reps in your each time. If you can only do 5, do 5 and then 5 and then 5, 3 reps of 5, and then you maybe build it up to 10 or whatever else. You start lifting lighter weights first and you build them up. You don't run at like 15 miles. You run maybe 150 yards. If that's all you can do, that's all you can do, and then you build it up until you get to a mile, 2 miles, 3 miles, whatever, until you get to the 15 or however many miles you want to run. And it's the same with languages, and it's the same with, I think, most things in life. You can't expect to run before you can walk or crawl. You have to take things slowly, and otherwise you get burnout and you get disillusioned and you get depressed and disappointed in your progress, because clearly you can't expect to be doing things like, for example, running a marathon if you've only just started running. It takes practice and time, and you will get there, and then you may even get better than some of the people that ran for a long time. And you meet people who do languages, and they started maybe a few years ago, and they are really, really good after a few years because they've taken time to do it.
Thank you so much. That's so inspiring. That one means a lot to me. Thank you. And it's also, I appreciate time for taking time to be able to do an interview with me. That one I appreciate. What does success look like to you? Because I asked, I don't know if the success changed for you or it's still the same.
The success for me personally, I guess, is achieving my goals. So whether that's a small goal or a big goal, it's achieving my goals. So, for example, success in saying this African language here, which is Xhosa, my goal in the very beginning was, I had 2 words that I knew, and I decided that I was going to use them, and I used them both. And my goal was that I would say them, people would understand them, and I got very positive reactions back. So that was a very easy goal met. And the words were hello and thank you. And that's all. And yeah, I mean, so a goal can be that small. Another goal I had a long, long time ago was I had to study German on my own over the summer. And I had to get to university degree level in German and pass an exam at university in Spain to show that, to demonstrate that I had that level of German to be able to do a course. And that was a very intense period of my life where I had 3 months to do it. And you're talking how many years of study, in several years of study to get to that level. But I had help because I'd done Swedish before and I'd done other languages that are related to German. And I moved to Germany and I lived and spoke just German for 3 months. And then I got to Spain and I passed the exam, and I was declared good enough to do this course that was meant for graduates. And so, yeah, I mean, that was a huge achievement for me. That achievement meant more to me than my actual degree from university. And I don't have a qualification in German, but because I passed that exam, I was very, very pleased. And yeah, I mean, that's probably one of the best things that I've done for languages. I found that, yeah. Yeah. But I mean, it doesn't need to be that big. It can, as I say, it can be as simple as the hello and thank you that I had the other day. That also meant an awful lot to me because of the reactions I got.
Yeah. You're doing amazing things. Thank you for that. Um, oh yeah, before that, because I actually want to also want to learn a language, but also teach it. Because I want to build a YouTube channel, a different one. How can I? You already talked. How can I be able to teach, like, let's say, Japanese? How can I start off teaching or something?
Now that's
I know that you said you're not like teaching, but I would like to know a little bit like process, so I can
yeah. I
like.
mean, it's a tough thing to say, teaching, because that's a very broad. Again, it's a very broad subject for me to sort of touch on it, on the important things. I think that there needs to be some kind of structure, and I think probably if you're learning it yourself, part of the process of learning, sometimes teaching can help you to cement in your knowledge and to really internalize what you're learning. So maybe taking some things that you're learning yourself and trying to teach them to other people can be a useful tool for you, but also you can see and get feedback from other people as to how they perceive that. I think being open to feedback is useful as a teacher. I find that teachers who listen and adapt are the better teachers. Teachers who make things interesting. So picking articles or things that trying to make you think or lead to discussion. It's really, really good. But I like feedback as well. I like to get feedback. But it's difficult for me to say in terms of setting up a YouTube channel to teach. Yeah, I mean that's how I would start if I were you. I'm not sure. I mean, I know for example how I would teach a language, but you know, and I would normally do that in the language. So I would use the language as much as possible, because I always find it so frustrating when you learn a language and you're always mostly you're hearing your native tongue. Whereas, you know, if I were to speak to you in another language and you were to learn it, then there are ways and means of making you understand what I'm saying. You know, by using props, by using, you know, different things, I can help you to understand that way.
Yes. And also, I noticed something very strange, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you're born in the mother tongue, like Vietnamese, for example, you would understand it at like a very like you would understand the meaning, right? But let's say if I'm learning Japanese, I wouldn't be able to connect the dot. Like, yeah, sure, I can like say wakarimasu, right, to understand. But it's not like if I say heu, right, for Vietnamese to understand. That's like in me. That's. Have you come across like that before?
So internalizing the meaning of a word sometimes takes time. For me, when I learn words, I very quickly internalize them. So, for example, a word for a certain object or a certain thing very quickly becomes another way of saying it or expressing it, in addition to the other languages I have. So, and what I find tricky then is especially when it's a word or a concept that's it's not tangible, and it's sometimes you'll get things that mean slightly it's the same idea, but it's slightly different, or it feels slightly different. And then what I find it difficult then to pair them back together, these two meanings, the meaning and the new word, because
Yeah,
they end up meaning something a bit slightly different to me, because the word may be related to other words that they're not related to in English or French or in another language. So yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think of a good example, but it's it's not easy to think of examples like this. But there are certainly words that I've learned where the new language sometimes will make more sense because of how they describe it. German is very like this, very much like this with a word for claustrophobia in German is Engangst, and it means scared of enclosed places, scared of narrow. It literally means like narrow places. And that makes sense, right? Whereas claustrophobia in English, unless you know what you have to, we learn the word and then we learn what it means. We don't necessarily understand it because of the word claustrophobia. We know phobia is to do with fear, but again, we have to learn that phobia is a fear because it's not the English word. The English word is fear. And then Germans will have, for example, with words like for illnesses, like Lungenentzündung is the word for pneumonia. And pneumonia in English, again, is another word that's Greek. It's a Greek word. And you learn the word and then you learn what it means, right? You don't necessarily know what it is because you hear the word pneumonia, unless you're Greek. Whereas the German word literally describes the illness. So Lungenentzündung. So lung is the word for lung in English, and Entzündung means an inflammation. So it's an inflammation of the lung. So in German speakers automatically know what pneumonia means, whereas native English speakers do not. We have to learn, a word and a concept. They don't. They just learn the word and that's it.
Wow, that's incredible. I noticed also English borrow a lot of from other languages. Why is that? I still, because I can see that, but why do they borrow that one?
English is a very open language for that. I mean, concepts that we don't have or concepts that are slightly different, we take and we just adopt and incorporate into English. And I think because of where we've been as nations, I mean, we've obviously been big colonial. We've been a big colonial nation, colonizing nation, and we've been to a number of different countries and made them colonies, which is a very different ethical discussion. But that's just the history, and from that, I think that it's meant that in a way, we've kind of, one of the fortes of English is that we do accept words from different countries and different languages very easily. Other languages like French don't, and so the language, sometimes it feels that if a language like French, they try and keep it as pure as possible by having an academy that looks after the language, whereas English doesn't really have that. It's just if a word is being used a lot, it's incorporated into the dictionary, so it becomes popular. And we have a number of words like that words that are taken from different languages. Sometimes the words are good and fun. Like one of the recent words that we've had in the last few years is hygge from Danish, which is kind of this style of a cozy style of you get them kind of hygge cafes and things like that. And they're quite cute words. Other words are actually they have a kind of a racist overtone or that people aren't even aware of. Like in British English, we have the word chav, and that word, it's basically like saying trailer trash or hillbilly in the US, I guess. So a chav person. They wear certain types of clothes. I'm approximating. It's not an exact translation, but just to kind of give you a reference. But that word actually is a Romany word, and it's short for chavor, and it means a boy. It's just a boy, but we use it in a negative way. And we used in English as well. We took the Arabic word for a woman, and it's a negative word in English. So the Arabic word for a woman is bint, but in English we say the word bint, and it's a derogatory word for a woman. And I don't know if you use it in the US, but we do in the UK, and so it can be for good and bad that we do this. We're not the only language to do that, though. There are other languages too that do exactly the same thing. And most people, actually, most speakers of English are completely unaware that these words have got these connotations and they mean these things to other people, and that they're words from other languages. They just accept them as that's just the word we say. You know, there are words that go through a history as well in English. Like gay started off as happy, then it was used for homosexual, and then most recently it's used for it's bad. And clearly, English is a dynamic language. I mean, to be able to do that kind of thing with one word and to change it 3 times, we made bad good. we made wicked good. So we've done so many very strange things in the language. English is, I always see this as, I never know when I go home what things are going to mean anymore. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yes, no, it's very, for me also, it's very interesting that UK and in the US, the English is very different.
Yeah, we have some different fashions.
Fashion.
But what I find actually in recent years, I found that there's been a lot more Americanisms are being used in the UK than before, and I think it's because of social media, internet, ability to watch things online like movies and series online, and so it's kind of there was something in the paper actually recently about this, about Brits using the word trash more, and we never. I mean, it was a very American word to use when I was growing up, but people are using different words a lot more, and hey, I mean, language changes, cultures change, we adapt, we grow. We sort of spike off into different areas that we're not expecting.
Yes, it's the same thing as food. It's the same thing as where they branch off. And also, I would like to understand what made you start to build your YouTube channel.
Oh, the YouTube channel, very, very simple actually. So I made the very first video, and I made it for a few reasons. One, I've been writing online with people who like languages on language forums. And then I wanted to reach out to other people who enjoy learning a number of languages, to be an example for people who love learning different languages but feel that they're on their own, so to let them know they're not on their own. So for connections, to show that people aren't freaks and they're not on their own. and then the third reason, and slightly less important to me, but was my friends that knew me in person growing up. They would always want me to say, they'd play sort of party pieces for people and say different things in different languages and say this and speak to that person, they'll speak to this person. And then they'd like to, I'd arrive at an event or a party and they'd say, oh, you're the guy that Thingyo mentioned, and yeah, and you speak all those languages. So it's kind of to be able to just give them a link that they could then just pass around and say, okay, this is the guy. And it's kind of, I guess it's, the sort of the freak show type thing, that people want to see, the performing seal. So I don't see anything wrong with that particularly. It's fine. So I recognize that was also a need, that people find it curious. It's not the thing that most people do on the street. Were it that way, I wouldn't need to reach out to people who like learning lots of languages in the first place, right? Because I'd just be in front of my door.
Thank you so much for that. You're one awesome human being. You know
that? You're very kind. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, before we let you go, 2 more questions. because I always notice that when we learn a language, but we forget them. So, like, but then you found out that there's in the back of your mind you have learned because it resurfaced. I noticed that for one. So how can we, if we lose, how can we not lose the vocabulary or the language we have learned? Because I think that also dealt with a lot of people have problem with that. How can they help build that strong connection?
So I always say if you don't use it, you lose it, and so you either revise and read and try and speak as much as possible. Otherwise, you lose things. You lose any skill, not just language. You lose any skill. You get rusty. You need to practice. It's like anything in life. If you're a marathon runner and you have a body like Arnold Schwarzenegger, and then tomorrow you stop and you just start eating cream cakes, then I can guarantee in a year's time you won't look like Arnold Schwarzenegger anymore. You know, it's just the way it is, and I think that one of the things that I notice with people is that we, as a race, human beings tend to put a lot of pressure and stress on themselves, and we expect to perform like robots, and we get frustrated with ourselves very quickly and very easily, and we expect the the sort of the impossible, and I think we need to be less hard on ourselves, and have more realistic expectations as to what we can and can't do. If you learn a language over the space of a year and then you have a year away from it, don't expect to have perfect recall of what you had a year previously. It's just not. It's not the way it works. If you want to retain it, you have to keep using it and practicing it. And otherwise, it falls. The level falls down. I mean, I myself, I know words that I'll hear them again on TV or whatever, like a year or two later, and maybe they're there back in the dark recesses of my mind. They may not have gone completely, but I recognize that they're not going to be as active as they were.
Okay.
So what tends to happen is the active vocabulary slowly becomes passive, and then the passive vocabulary slowly falls off into an oblivion. And that's just a natural thing. I mean, I do find that if you've learned a language to a very high level, it's difficult to lose it completely. If you've learned a language to an intermediate level, and just to be clear, an intermediate level is the level where you can communicate your ideas. So this isn't a basic level that I'm talking about. This is a level where you can get by with people in a conversation. You can lose it, and I've experienced that myself. The question you have to ask yourself is, do I really care? And I don't mean that to say, that everyone should go, oh well, never mind, gone. But really, I mean, your situation changes. Do you still need to speak? I don't know. Do you still need to speak Estonian or Korean? Has your situation changed? Are you not speaking that language now because you haven't got any friends anymore in that community, or because you've moved away, or because you've changed job and now you're focused on something else? So you have to be realistic with your life. Why am I doing this? And that's one of the reasons why I said earlier in this chat that I set myself realistic goals. So I'm not going to make myself learn a language that I don't need beyond a basic level if I don't need it beyond a basic level, because it's a waste of my time to do it. It's also unrealistic that I will keep that level because I won't have the time to dedicate to it. Each individual knows how much time they've got, and I think you have to be honest with yourself from the beginning. You have work, you have other things that you may need to do. Whatever you need to do in life, you know how much time you have and how much time you can dedicate. You also need to sleep and to eat. So don't forget about that. That's important. And the thing I always say, don't beat yourself up if you forget something. It's the most natural thing. I mean, we forget, I think, as native speakers of a language, we forget how long it took us to learn to communicate in our native language. We forget that very, very quickly. It's incredible, and we forget that we made lots of mistakes. But all you need to do is talk to your family. You know, if your family's around and you can talk to them, then or recall conversations or amongst the family of funny things you used to say, funny words you used to say, how you couldn't pronounce certain things, and it's amazing. I mean, they're there. They're there. Those examples are there, and it took you a long time to get them right because you made more mistakes. You know, just getting it wrong, and it was corrected over and over and over again because you couldn't write it down. The only way you could do it is by repeating and remembering, and it took you a while to get to the point where you could speak fluently and correctly. But people forget that very, very quickly.
Yes, yeah. I was thinking about that as you were talking about it because it's the same thing as my the Vietnamese language. I was like, in order for me to learn a language, same thing has to do with when I was a little, right? I didn't speak English. I speak Vietnamese, and it was programmed over and over and over, and I make lots of mistakes. And you know, it was like if I say a certain word, it'd be like my mom would correct me, right? And it would be wrong. But yes, you're absolutely correct. Where can we find you online, Richard?
So you can come to my I have a Facebook page called Speaking Fluently. It's on Twitter as well. Speaking Fluently without the G. Speaking Fluently. And then the Polyglot Conference, which is again Polyglot Conference on Facebook, on Twitter, and there's a YouTube channel. So every year we bring people to talk about different topics related to language, and I put the videos on the YouTube channel for people to access free of charge, so that they get the information, and it's people talking about various topics. And then, yeah, they're probably the best ways to reach me. And the polyglotconference.com website is if anyone wants to come and join us in person, whether you're learning your first language or your 31st language, you're welcome. As long as you like language, then I think you're going to enjoy it.
Okay, thank you so much. Before we go, you have on your thing, can we actually accelerate our learning for language? Because you know how like they have like all the 30 days, and can we actually accelerate, or how, like you said, like it takes a long time? How can we?
I don't believe in a magic pill. So you can do intensive courses, intensive programs. You can learn a lot in a short time, but, and this is the big but, okay, if you can't carry that on over a longer period, then I personally find the faster you learn it, the more quickly you also forget. so it takes a lot of repetition to get this right. And so yeah, people naturally, they want to do everything yesterday, and they want to be able to do everything perfectly yesterday. And unfortunately, until we have a chip implanted in our brains where we can do that, it takes practice and time and effort. And there are no real shortcuts, I don't think. I think that the only way you can do it is through hard work and determination. The thing that people are most shocked at is just how much you can do in a period of time. People sort of will often they'll learn the very, very basics, and then they'll sort of just disappear and run off. But actually, if you stick with it and you take your time over it, you'll be surprised at just how much you can achieve. And that in itself is that feeling of, wow, I've really accelerated quickly. But it's actually just normal.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Okay, guys, subscribe to my channel and like my video, and I'll see you guys next time. Oh, and thank you so much for the interview. That was awesome.